So this video is going to be called the richness of integrated baseball and the unveiling of real political possibility. Because what we've really drilled down here is 1900 in Cuba as this very crucial, very essential moment, not only in the national history of Cuban liberation, of course, a massive moment, but in the Western Hemisphere and globally at large, right? Because of the amount of real diversity of experience that is in Cuba at this period of time, in terms of native Cubans, in terms of Spanish people, and in terms of Black American people who come to Cuba to participate in the game of baseball, because they're disbarred from doing so in their home country. Um, what you have here is a profound occlusion, like a gathering of different subjectivities that all join together to participate in the game of baseball as a cultural movement, as a way of being together, and as such shows us political possibility of collaboration in a way that very little, if anything else, in the history of humanity ever has. Right? It's that significant. Again, this is we're just striking the gold, striking the foundation, because this is what baseball has created. This is the great beauty and possibility of baseball, political possibility, that's reflected in a modern context to this day. It's the political possibility of gathering together across all borders and bounds, even language barriers, right? Even even language. So gathering together across all of these borders and bounds to participate in this experience of baseball, right? This cultural phenomenon of baseball. Um, what you have in the history of humanity is a constant state of fragmentation, whether that's a fragmentation based on ethnicity, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on religion, right? It's an in group, out group, and we discussed this in Civilization and Culture and the Confrontation of Meaning. The in group, out group mentality that characterizes maybe the most primal or animal state of mankind. And baseball, as a radical political force, not only undergirds the entirety of the Cuban national liberation project, it's tied in at the very foundation of what happens there, as a cultural uprising of the Cuban people in the face of the Spanish colonial government and Spanish colonial traditional mores. Um, but baseball, in a larger humanistic global sense, is something that shatters this very traditional, hierarchical way of organizing human beings, whether that's through the color of their skin, whether that's through class hierarchies, whether that's through roles in society, so to speak. Um, it's a way of shattering all of these illusions, these narrative stories that actually themselves are a sort of trauma history of humanity at large, and need to distinguish oneself from the community, right? From the real brotherhood, from the real sisterhood, from the real humanityhood of being, right? To actually come into real communion. And a picture like this is so beautiful. This is a semi-professional post-game photograph, because what it shows is this real communal gathering around the game of baseball and participation in the game of baseball, which is a leveling of all of these false hierarchies and false status symbol making projects, which are really just ways of elevating the ego. Because I'm identified to this, because I'm attached to that, that means I am worth XYZ. This is a typical project that's continued to this day in terms of the idea of stars and statistics in baseball. But what baseball has always been about at root, in the real participation of it, and what leadership in baseball really constitutes, is supporting your entire team and bringing that entire team forward into increased ability and increased success together, right? So it's a way of creating a real sense of community and a real bond of community through that engaged participation as a group in the sport of baseball. Because baseball is a network. It doesn't just function unless you're Satchel Paige and you call everybody off the field just to strike out the hitter. Baseball functions as an ecosystem, and it's a way of teaching at a profound spiritual level the responsibility that comes within that ecosystem. So baseball itself is like a spiritual technology, right? Because, and this is elucidated so clearly in 1900 in Cuba, you have this moment of time it's so profoundly politically radical, not only just in terms of the Cuban national situation, in terms of this radical new identity emerging into a post-colonial society, quote unquote post-colonial society, um, with removed from the fetters of the Spanish colonial government. And what they are doing is they've abolished slavery. They've made Black Cubans and Native Cubans an essential, critical part of the community. And one of the best ways to show that and to exhibit that and to declare that as a sovereign state and a sovereign nation, a Native Cuban nation, is to integrate the sport of baseball as the cultural pastime that has quickly become to define the communal engagement proper within the Cuban nation. Um, and this integration, again, just because of the cultural richness of different backgrounds that exist in Cuba at the time, um, Cesar, right? Cesar Lopez, the man I was talking to previously, about different aspects of Cuban history and kind of going back and forth as I was writing the the origins of modern baseball essay. He said, we have people from all over the world that were coming to Cuba and are coming to Cuba. He said Catalans, people from Japan. His father, I believe, was from Catalonia. Japan, I think. Who else? Where else was he saying? He was saying people from all over the world were coming to Cuba because of this this unfettering, right? And this is such a huge part of what we're really looking at with the Cuban nation as it separates from Spain. As it's this political frontier of diversity and uh, gathering of different experience. So this is a really fertile ground for this radical new potentiality of humanity to be exhibited. And if you look at the broader scope of human history, you don't really have moments like this. It's so incredibly modern that in a nation, a recently sovereign nation out from under an empire's control, right? This is not like a territory that's been conquered by Rome and then has a profusion of different cultural diversity under this empirical relationship. This is a nation that has been liberated by its own means and by its own hand. The United States is a little involved, but that's where it gets complicated. A nation that has been liberated from this Spanish colonial fetter, and it is now existing in this mode of the sovereign state and sovereign nation, and it has this immense integrative, cross-border, cross-cultural, cross-racial, right, cross-ethnic, across all of these lines. It has this fertile communal cultural device through which it is acting out and representing and symbolizing and practicing this radical new value and this radical new ethos, which is really, it's decades, even potentially hundreds of years ahead of its time. Because what it symbolizes, right, is it symbolizes across borders, across space and time, across ethnicity and religion and race. We're participating in a cultural act that brings joy and brings people closer together, right? Against all of these sort of traditional ways of separating people, right? Creating class hierarchies or creating caste systems, different ways of delineating who is meaningful and who is not meaningful. So what is so necessary in a human spiritual sense is for a technology like this to come into being, which in itself is fundamentally collaborative. If you really play baseball and you know baseball, being a leader on the field of baseball is not being above any of the other players on the field. It's being with them and working through the situations that emerge in a baseball context is problem solving with them, helping with solutions, standing up when you need to stand up, supporting the people around you, right? This is the fostering of a real community atmosphere through the game of baseball, right? Again, this is a nonviolent sport. This is a sport of collaboration, strategy, intellect, study, right? It's a very disciplined, rigorous sport of the engagement of the self in the field of being with other people, right? This is a practice. It's a cultivated and cultivating practice. So you have this technology, which enters into the picture, and funnily enough, is adopted on the global stage, right? Not just in the solipsistic United States stage of its own uh, historical understanding of what baseball is and where it comes from and where it's going, but on the global stage, it's adopted by Cuba as a national liberation movement, as a way of politically and culturally liberating an entire group of people against a colonial regime. And this adoption occurs in real time as this movement is exploding over the span of 50 years. Um, so you have it's just this very fertile ground for this experiment to occur and for this technology of baseball to reveal its real political possibilities, right? These real political possibilities being radical integration at a global level, right? At a global level, which actually is the creation of real human community, right? And by real human community, it's like it's world community. We're not at odds with each other because we live in a different on a different continent. We're not at odds with each other because there's a different skin color, or we're not at odds with each other because there's a different religious belief system. The ground of baseball, as we've discussed so consistently, is an embodiment and it's a materialization of the real spiritual conditions of mankind and of humanity. And in real time, you're faced with that. You're faced with the responsibility in the moment that we talked about with Joe DiMaggio and the young child. You're faced with the practice and the discipline that is the spiritual evolution of the self, as we talked about with Lou Gehrig. You're faced with overcoming tremendous odds, as we talked about with Jackie Robinson, or we talked about with Stan Kovaleski. All of these things, right? It's a stage for this spiritual journey, this spiritual transformation project of mankind to be engaged, to be witnessed, and to be metabolized, right? So that's an incredibly powerful thing. Even the concept and the idea of the baseball stadium as a theater for that spiritual witnessing and that process of transformation is again something that's so deeply ingrained into the collective unconscious of what baseball is and means. So when you look at a picture like this, or when you study this moment in Cuban history as a movement maybe of even 150 years, but really a movement that really turns the lock at 1900, you're looking at something that's prescient. It's almost like a foreshadowing or a prophetic moment in human history. And this, you can no way understate it in terms of the real meaning and power of baseball, because what baseball is revealing through its unconscious technology, the way that it's developed, the game itself, what it's revealing is that it's a sort of throughway. It's a way of being that reveals radical new possibilities and new ways of being together, which is a form of human collaboration that transcends. Right? It's not that it dissociates from them. It transcends through incorporating them. Human difference, right? So incorporating human difference is not saying we are all the same. It's saying we are all different, but we are all playing this game, right? And it's a way of unifying. We don't even speak the same language, but you and I speak the language of baseball, and we're playing the game of baseball now, right? We don't believe the same thing, but we believe the language of baseball, or we speak the language of baseball, right? So that's really what's happening at this moment in time in Cuba in 1900. If you think about that in a global, world historical, civilizational context, what that represents is really fundamentally, it's a developmental leap at the level of the species, right? And so what I mean by that is that so consistently historically in humanity, you have the attempt to establish hierarchies, whether those are moralized hierarchies or ethnic hierarchies, whatever they are, to delineate who is meaningful and who is meaningless, right? Who is a servant and who is a king, or the peasant royalty dynamic, so to speak. And that manifests in many different ways. It manifests in modern American capitalism. It manifests in feudal Europe. It manifests in slavery in Greece. It manifests in the concepts of divine right in a place like Egypt. Right? There's many different ways that this manifests. And so what we're really getting to is we're coming out of this collective fantasy of perceived difference in a way that allows us to exploit, manipulate, and abuse one another, because we have this inflated sense of self that we're attempting to paint with a broad brush and create the economic foundations of an empire with, right? That some people are just more meaningful because they believe this, or this is the color of their skin, or they have this amount of money. It doesn't work like that's not real. It's not real nature. Real nature is that we are it's a massive species that is slowly evolving over time and slowly changing over time. So that's something that, like, on a real level, kind of eviscerates the concept of brotherhood, right? This concept of moving together through history and through time. And that's something, again, that's very far away from war and real conflict and real violence. It is into gamesmanship. It is into play. It's into meeting each other on the field, and we are playing this game of baseball. So there's something deeply, deeply real about that, and the fact that the technology lines up perfectly with this moment in time in this island nation in the Caribbean, during this moment of national liberation, and these political possibilities are opening up at a radical new level. The abolition of slavery, and then immediately the integration of Black Cubans and Native people into the game of baseball. What are we really talking about here? We're talking about the opening up of the cultural aperture in a modern sense. Again, nations are this is a modern development. Cuba becomes a nation when nations are becoming popular. This is a modern development, and you have the opening up of the cultural throughway of the most important fixture, the most important cultural technology of said nation to effectively all, right? Black Americans are coming from across borders to play this game of baseball, and they're being welcomed with open arms, and they're being celebrated. It's not to say that at the abolition of slavery, racism was abolished in Cuba as well. That's just not the case. But these Black Americans are coming to Cuba, and they're being celebrated for their achievements on the baseball field. You see this trajectory, this grand trajectory that we're opening up. It's the political possibility of real collaboration and a stripping away of these, again, I'll say the narrative fetters which have so long limited humanity, right? In terms of difference as being constructed as meaningful and meaningless, or valuable and valueless. And then you look more and you say, okay, difference as being constructed as a collective participation of diversity, which illuminates by contrast and by difference the full spectrum of the majesty and the experience of humanity or existence at large. That's what we're moving towards. And baseball itself is a technological bridge, which in this period of time in Cuba is being elucidated very loudly and very clearly, in a way that it's almost like you look at these photos. And it's like a time out of time, because you can see how old they are. You can see that they're a relic from a time past, but then you look at them and you say, how is this possible, right? All of these people from clearly all of these different backgrounds and experiences, they're gathered together and they're smiling. They're enjoying the participation in this game, right? This is a boundary breaking event. And this is a boundary breaking culture. And it's real. It's happening in real time. This isn't an artistic movement. This isn't a literary movement. This is a political, cultural movement of community, which is happening through the game of baseball, which in itself is breaking decades, if not hundreds or even hundreds of years of earlier. It's breaking this earlier, this dam of constructed power, right? And it's moving towards love through baseball, right? Love is in real collaboration, real community, real grounded practice of gathering together and working through life, participating in life. And someone who arrives to that field or arrives to that scene who's a different color of skin, or believes something different, or whatever it is, they're being welcomed in to the game of baseball, right? As knowledge that this is it's a global communal participation. And you're starting to see that again more and more in the modern sense. But what's necessary, right, is that understanding through baseball is metabolized collectively at a political and cultural level at large to understand that. And that's breaking away, again, even from this previously radical concept of the sovereign nation, breaking away from that into an even deeper radicalism, an even deeper political, real human truth of global community, that we are one species, right, on the planet Earth. And we are all participating in this metaphorical game of baseball, right? So what does that mean in terms of our responsibility to one another? What does that mean in terms of our attempts to create power or our attempts to control and manipulate others for personal gain, right? This is real ecosystemic awareness. And it occurs first really on the baseball field because you're participating with 8 other people on your team at any given moment. And you have a responsibility to them to maintain your moment, your place in that grand field, right? It's a microcosm of the macrocosm of real political responsibility and real political community on a global stage. The baseball field is your moment, and then obviously you have the field of being at large. This is a way of learning, and so by opening these gates and opening these doors across racial and ethnic borders, and even national borders, right? Cuba and America through Cuban professional baseball in 1900, you're really seeing a profound moment of breakthrough there. And I would challenge you. I would say, can you find something like this in history? You might be able to find something that might approximate it, but with the amount of power and modernity that's present in this moment in history, it would probably be pretty difficult. And this is just a testament, again, to the political possibilities of baseball. And that's what we're headed towards, inevitably, because a creation of consciousnness or a moment of consciousness and a moment of awakening is the realization that we are a global community. One person's actions, right, as it is as well known in kind of the fabric of space-time in a scientific sense, one person's actions on one end of the globe is just going to impact someone else on the other end. And then it's going to impact that one person who committed those actions. It's a simple, basic process of and part of living in an ecosystem. None of that occurs in a vacuum. So you have moments like this in a technology like baseball, which is revealing and unveiling through the unconscious architecture of the game itself as it's constructed. It's almost constructed intuitively through the human unconsciousness and through the human imagining. The game of baseball itself is slowly revealing through culture the truth of nature, the truth of physics, right? The truth of and reality of being human through participation. Not through a story, not through a narrative, but through life, through the experience of being on the field of baseball and playing by those rules, so to speak, which are, again, rules of nature, right? We're getting kind of close to that moment and that point. So there's a deep richness there that emerges through humanity's preparation to go to this next stage, right? To this next paradigm of development. Baseball is a collaborative sport of mutual participation, which requires, regardless of who you are, right, regardless of where you come from, regardless of all of these different factors, that you play in your role and participate in your role in this field of baseball, right, as a member of a team, and that your team's success ultimately depends on how well your team works together. Because one person very rarely is the one who dictates success in baseball. It has to be collaborative because you have many games in a season. No one really holds the deepest, highest level of participation in every single one of those games. You have to pick up your team members, right? That's another essence of the game. Again, you hit the ball 3 times out of 10 times successfully, you are one of the best players around, right? That's the amount of failure that occurs in real time in baseball, just because of how hard it is to hit a baseball. It's one of the hardest things to do. So you look at that and the technology that's availed in that political moment in time in Cuba in 1900, and you can see the future, right? It's a moment of stepping back in time, but you step back in order to see the future. It's something that was almost it was so early that it was like a moment of human genius, so to speak. And this is really important because when you look at this moment of human genius, this is a collaborative, multicultural moment of genius. This is not the conventionally termed individual genius. This is the genius of a political social movement, which many people participated in. Many, including the Cuban National Liberation Movement. It cannot be extracted from or separated from this moment and movement of baseball itself in Cuba and the political possibilities that emerge in 1900. You have this moment of collective participation, which is so prescient and so unheard of through the technology of baseball that is expressed and manifested in a moment where it's like, how is this even possible? How is this even happening? And yet it is, and it's happening in such a grand and creative scale that there's dancing, there's music, there's these beautiful stadiums that emerge. There are legends that are grown from the foundations and even the poorest parts of Cuba. Alejandro Oms, right? Jose Mendez. You have these fantastic players that emerge from this immensely fertile ground. You have Cool Papa Bell, who's participating in this. You have Oscar Charleston. You have some of the best players who have ever played the game of baseball are gathering together in this incredibly fertile cultural and political moment and movement to contribute, to participate. Because what it is, it's the opening up of political possibility. And when you open that up, you have just incredibly profound and beautiful things that happen. The design of the uniforms, the photography that's captured, the media, all of it is a distillation of that beautiful, fertile moment in history that itself shows us, and it shows us so early and in such a prescient way, the political possibilities of the future through the most unexpected form, through the game of baseball, through something innocuous, through something communal, through something it's 9 innings on a baseball field, you know? So that's what I got. I'll catch y'all on the next one.